The rain came down in sheets that morning, turning the harbor into a blur of grey water and darker grey sky. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the auction yard, her jacket pulled tight against the wind, watching as men in waterproof gear gestured towards something she couldn't quite see from where she stood. The cold had already worked its way through her clothes, settling into her bones with the familiar ache of worry that never quite left her anymore. She had $723 in her checking account. $723 between her and eviction, between her daughter's next meal and the choice she'd sworn she'd never have to make. The notice had come 3 days ago, printed on cheap paper that somehow made the threat feel more real. 30 days to vacate. The landlord's patience, worn thin by 3 months of partial payments and promises, had finally broken. Behind her, in the parking lot, her 15-year-old Honda sat with one headlight out and a registration sticker that had expired 2 months ago. She couldn't afford to fix either. Inside the car, Emma waited. 9 years old and wrapped in a blanket that had seen too many winters, doing homework on her lap because they'd lost the kitchen table to a pawn shop 6 weeks earlier. Sarah had told her daughter this was just an errand, that she'd be back soon, that everything was fine. The lies came easier now, smooth as worn stones in her mouth. The auctioneer's voice cut through the rain, amplified by a speaker system that crackled with moisture. Next lot, ladies and gentlemen. Something a bit unusual today. There was laughter in his tone, the kind that invited everyone else to join in. We've got ourselves a genuine maritime vessel. Well, parts of one anyway. Sarah moved closer, drawn by curiosity more than intention. The crowd was small, mostly men in work boots and baseball caps, hands shoved deep in their pockets. They shifted aside without looking at her, the way people do when they've already decided you don't matter. This here's what's left of the silk caravan, the auctioneer continued. Merchant vessel, historic registry, sank in the harbor about 18 months back, during that storm we all remember. Salvage company pulled her up last month, but turns out she's more trouble than she's worth. Structures compromised, hulls breached in multiple sections, and she's been underwater long enough that most of what's left is rust and rot. More laughter rippled through the crowd. Sarah could see it now, the dark shape rising from the water like a wounded animal. The ship listed heavily to one side, its deck slick with algae and barnacles. Water still dripped from gaps in the hull, forming puddles on the concrete beneath it. Even from a distance, she could smell it. Salt and decay, metal and time. She's being sold as is. Where is? The auctioneer said. Buyers responsible for removal within 30 days, or it goes to scrap. Documentations included, ship's papers, manifest, the works. Though I can't imagine what good that'll do anyone. Someone nearby muttered something about bad luck and ghost ships. Someone else suggested it'd make a decent artificial reef. The jokes came easily, casual cruelty dressed up as humor. Let's start the bidding at $1,000, the auctioneer announced. Do I hear 1,000? Silence answered him. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable now, as if the ship had become embarrassing simply by existing. All right, let's try 500. More silence. A man near the front shook his head and walked away, boots splashing through puddles. 200. The auctioneer's voice had lost its theatrical edge. He sounded tired now, going through motions he knew were pointless. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope exactly, something stranger. She stared at the ship, at its broken lines and wounded bulk, and saw something no one else seemed to notice. The way it still held its shape despite everything. The way its bones, rusted and damaged as they were, refused to collapse completely. $100, the auctioneer tried. Someone give me 100 and take this thing off our hands. The silence stretched longer this time. Men checked their watches, pulled out phones, prepared to leave. 50. Sarah's hand went up before she could stop it. The movement was automatic, driven by something deeper than reason. The crowd turned to look at her, surprise giving way quickly to amusement. She felt their eyes like weights, measuring her, finding her wanting. The auctioneer blinked. "Ma'am, you're bidding $50. 700, she heard herself say. The words came out steady, stronger than she felt. "I'll give you 700. The laughter that followed was not kind. It rolled through the small crowd like thunder, men nudging each other, grins spreading. One of them said something she couldn't quite hear, but the tone was clear enough. $700, the auctioneer repeated, professional enough not to join the laughter, but unable to hide his skepticism. Going once. He paused, scanning the crowd. Twice. Another pause, longer this time. Sold to the lady in the blue jacket. The gavel came down with a hollow crack that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Sarah stood there, rain soaking through her hair, and felt the full weight of what she'd just done settle over her like a second skin. $700. Almost everything she had left. Spent on a ship that was functionally a corpse, on a vessel everyone else had the sense to walk away from. A man in a reflective vest approached her with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression that somehow felt worse than the laughter. "You'll need to sign here, ma'am. And here. Payments due immediately." Her hand shook as she wrote the check. The numbers looked enormous on the small piece of paper. 7, 0, 0, period, 0, 0. She tore it free and handed it over, watching as he stapled it to the documentation. "You've got 30 days to remove it or arrange alternative disposal," he said. "After that, it's our problem again, and you lose the purchase price. Fair warning. The salvage company estimates removal at around $3,000. Minimum." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "Also," he continued, more gently now, "I probably shouldn't say this, but I hope you know what you're doing. That ship's seen better days. Most folks wouldn't touch it for free." "I know," she managed. He handed her a manila envelope. "Ship's papers, manifest, title transfer, all that. Good luck." She tucked the envelope under her jacket to keep it dry and walked back to her car. Through the windshield, she could see Emma looking up, hopeful and worried in equal measure. Sarah opened the door and slid into the driver's seat, bringing the smell of rain and salt with her. "Mom?" Emma's voice was small. "What were you doing?" Sarah started the engine, watching the wipers struggle against the downpour. "Something probably very stupid." "Did you buy something?" "I bought a ship." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, "A whole ship? What's left of one? Why?" It was a fair question. Sarah wished she had a fair answer. "I don't know. Baby, I really don't know." They drove home in silence, the envelope resting on Sarah's lap like evidence of a crime. By the time they pulled into the apartment complex parking lot, the rain had eased to a steady drizzle. Sarah sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, staring at nothing. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister, brief and pointed. "Did you figure out rent yet?" She didn't reply. Instead, she picked up the envelope and opened it. Inside were documents that smelled of mildew and time. The ship's registration, dated and official. A manifest listing cargo from its final voyage. Historical documentation identifying it as a merchant vessel built in Singapore in 1947, originally designed for the Southeast Asian trade routes. At the bottom of the envelope, her fingers found something else. A photograph, old and water-damaged, showing the silk Caravan in its prime. The ship looked proud then, its hull painted deep blue, its deck neat and purposeful. Men stood on the dock beside it, dressed in clothes from another era, their expressions serious as they loaded cargo. Sarah stared at the photo for a long time. Whatever the ship had been once, it was gone now. She had bought the memory of something, not the thing itself, and she had no idea what to do with either. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah sat at the kitchen counter with her laptop, searching for information about the silk caravan. The internet offered fragments, nothing substantial. A brief mention in a maritime registry. A newspaper article from 1952 about a successful voyage carrying textiles from Asia to the American West Coast. A notation in a historical society database identifying it as one of the last independent merchant vessels operating on traditional trade routes before containerization changed everything. There was one other thing, a mention in a collector's forum, dated 3 years earlier. Someone asking about the ship, wondering if anyone knew where it had ended up. The thread had no responses. She closed the laptop and sat in the darkness, listening to the building settle around her. From upstairs came the muffled sound of an argument. Next door, a television played too loud. Somewhere, a baby cried. The ordinary sounds of people living too close together, all of them struggling in their own ways. The eviction notice sat on the counter where she'd left it. 30 days. The ship had 30 days before it became someone else's problem again. The symmetry felt deliberate, mocking. Sarah thought about what she could have done with $700. Bought time, maybe. Paid enough of the rent to get another extension. Put gas in the car and food in the fridge. All the sensible, necessary things. Instead, she'd bought a ship she couldn't use and couldn't afford to move. Her phone buzzed again. Another text. This one from her former employer. She'd been let go 6 months ago. Position eliminated. Nothing personal, they'd said. The text was from HR, a reminder that her COBRA insurance benefits would expire at the end of the month. They encouraged her to seek alternative coverage. She set the phone face down and closed her eyes. In the morning, Sarah woke to find Emma standing beside her bed, already dressed for school. "Mom," she said quietly, "can we see the ship?" Sarah blinked, orienting herself. "Now? After school? Why?" Emma shrugged, a gesture too careful for a 9-year-old. "You bought it. We should see it." There was logic there that Sarah couldn't quite argue with. She nodded. "Okay. After school." The day stretched long and anxious. Sarah spent it applying for jobs online, her resume growing thinner with each rejection email that pinged her inbox. She had been a logistics coordinator for a shipping company once, good at her job, reliable. Then, the merger happened, and reliability didn't matter anymore. At 3:30, she picked up Emma from school and drove toward the harbor. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy and gray. Emma was quiet in the passenger seat, her backpack clutched on her lap. The auction yard was nearly empty now. The crowd from yesterday scattered. The silk caravan sat where they'd left it, dark and massive, water still pooling beneath its damaged hull. Up close, in daylight, it looked even worse than Sarah remembered. Rust had eaten through sections of the deck. Barnacles clung to every surface like tumors. The smell was stronger, too. Salt and rot and something else, something deeper. They stood there for a long moment, mother and daughter, staring up at the wounded vessel. "It's big," Emma said finally. "It is. Can we go on it?" Sarah hesitated. The salvage company had secured a metal gangway to the deck, presumably for inspection purposes. It didn't look particularly stable, but it held. "Carefully," she said. They climbed together, Emma's small hand tight in Sarah's. The gangway creaked, but held their weight. When they reached the deck, Sarah felt the ship shift slightly beneath her feet, a subtle movement that spoke of instability and time. The deck was treacherous. Holes gaped in several places, revealing darkness below. Sarah guided Emma carefully around them, testing each step. Most of the ship's superstructure was gone, torn away by salvage crews or lost to the sea. What remained were the bones, the framework that had once supported a working vessel. At the center of the deck, they found a hatch. It was partially open, its metal cover bent back at an angle. Sarah knelt beside it, peering into the darkness below. A ladder descended into shadow, its rungs crusted with rust. "What's down there?" Emma asked. "The cargo hold, probably. Can we see?" Every instinct Sarah had told her no. The ship was unstable, dangerous, no place for a child. But Emma was looking at her with an expression Sarah recognized. It was the same look her daughter got when she was trying very hard to be brave, to not show how scared she was about everything falling apart around them. "Let me check first," Sarah said. She found a piece of rope coiled near the hatch and tested it. It seemed solid enough. She tied one end to a support post and let the other end drop through the hatch, creating a safety line alongside the ladder. "Stay here," she told Emma. "If I say anything at all, you run back to the car. Understand?" Emma nodded, her eyes wide. Sarah descended slowly, testing each rung before committing her weight. The ladder held, groaning but stable. As she moved deeper, the light from above faded, replaced by a dim, greenish quality that filtered through gaps in the hull. The cargo hold opened beneath her, larger than she'd expected. Her feet found solid decking, though it was slick with moisture. She pulled out her phone and turned on its flashlight, sweeping the beam around the space. Water had been here. That much was obvious. The walls showed high water marks, dark lines indicating where the sea had reached before the salvage operation. But the hold itself was surprisingly intact. Metal support beams crossed the ceiling at regular intervals. Along the walls, she could see the remnants of cargo securing systems, heavy bolts, and metal rings designed to keep goods from shifting during rough seas. The hold was mostly empty now. Salvage crews had cleared out anything obviously valuable, but in the far corner, partially hidden behind a support beam, Sarah's light caught on something different. A stack of containers, smaller than the standard shipping kind. They were made of metal, their surfaces dull and stained, but their shape was unusual, cylindrical rather than rectangular, about 4 feet long and sealed at both ends. They were lashed together with canvas straps that had mostly rotted away, but the containers themselves looked solid. Sarah approached them carefully, watching her footing. Up close, she could see markings on the containers. Not English, something else. Chinese characters, faded but still visible, stamped into the metal, and numbers, dates, maybe 1947, 1948. She tried to lift one of the containers. It was heavy, far heavier than she'd expected. Not the weight of empty metal, but something substantial inside. She set it down gently, her heart beginning to beat faster. "Mom," Emma's voice floated down from above, worried. "I'm okay," Sarah called back. "Just looking around." She examined the containers more closely. There were 12 of them in total, all identical in size and marking. The seals appeared intact, somehow surviving decades underwater. Whatever was inside had been protected. Sarah's mind raced. The manifest. She'd barely glanced at it last night, overwhelmed by exhaustion and regret. But it had listed cargo, historical cargo from the ship's final voyages. She took several photos with her phone, documenting everything. The containers, the markings, their placement in the hold. Then She climbed back up, emerging into the gray afternoon light. Emma stood exactly where Sarah had left her, anxious but patient. "What did you see?" "Something strange," Sarah said honestly. "Come on, let's go home." That evening, after Emma was in bed, Sarah spread the ship's manifest across the kitchen counter. It was water-damaged and difficult to read, but she worked through it slowly, line by line. Most of the entries were mundane: machine parts, raw rubber, tea, standard trade goods for a post-war merchant vessel. But near the bottom of the final page, there was an entry that made her pause. Textile samples, historical collection, 47 units. The notation was brief, almost dismissive. But there was something else. A handwritten addendum in faded ink. Hold separately. Climate-controlled storage required. Authentication documents attached. Sarah flipped through the remaining pages in the envelope, searching for the authentication documents. At first, she found nothing. Then, tucked into a torn section of the envelope's lining, a single page, folded and brittle with age. She unfolded it carefully. The document was typed on letterhead from something called the Oriental Textile Preservation Society, dated 1948. It confirmed receipt of 47 historical textile samples, including rare silks from the Ming and Qing dynasties, imperial brocades, and ceremonial fabrics of exceptional quality. The document went on to note that the collection was being transported to a museum in San Francisco, accompanied by a separate shipment of authentication, certificates, and provenance documentation. The value was listed at the bottom, adjusted for the time period: $85,000 in historical and cultural significance. Sarah sat back, her mind working through the implications. $85,000 in 1948 money. She grabbed her phone and searched for an inflation calculator. The numbers that appeared made her breath catch. In today's currency, that collection would be worth approximately $1.1 million. And that was just the baseline historical value from 75 years ago, before accounting for the passage of time, increased rarity, or the collector's market. But that assumed the collection still existed, that it had survived the sinking, the salvage operation, the years underwater. The chances were slim. Fabric deteriorated quickly in seawater. Even protected containers would likely have leaked, allowing moisture and salt to destroy anything organic inside. And yet, those metal cylinders in the hold looked intact. Their seals appeared unbroken. Sarah's hands trembled as she set down the document. This was probably nothing. A dead end. A false hope. The containers were most likely empty or full of rotted garbage. She'd be a fool to let herself believe otherwise. But something in her chest, that same instinct that had made her raise her hand at the auction, told her she needed to know for certain. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to the 3 part-time jobs she was juggling and returned to the ship alone. The harbor was quiet, just a few workers moving cargo in the distance. No one paid attention as she climbed the gangway and descended once more into the cargo hold. The containers were exactly where she'd left them. She had brought tools this time: a crowbar, heavy-duty gloves, and a tarp to lay them on. She worked carefully, aware that damaging the contents would destroy any potential value. The first container's seal resisted, then gave way with a metallic scrape. Cold air rushed out, carrying a scent that wasn't decay. It was something else. Old fabric, preserved fabric, dry and papery. Sarah lifted the lid fully and looked inside. The beam of her flashlight illuminated layers of oiled paper, wrapped around something solid. She peeled back the first layer, then the second. Her hands were shaking now, making the work difficult. Beneath the protective wrapping lay fabric, not rotted remnants or stained rags, Actual fabric, folded precisely, its colors muted but present. She lifted it carefully into the light. Silk. There was no mistaking it. The texture, the weight, the way it caught the light, even through decades of darkness. Deep blue with embroidered patterns in gold thread. Dragons, she thought. Or phoenixes. The stitching was impossibly fine, each thread placed with a precision that spoke of hands long dead. She set it down on the top as if it were made of glass and opened the second container. More fabric, this time red, with patterns in white and black, then green, then gold. Each piece carefully wrapped, meticulously preserved. By the time she opened the sixth container, Sarah was crying without quite knowing why. Not from joy or relief, though those were there. Something else. The weight of holding something that had survived so much. Something that had been written off, abandoned, left for dead, and yet somehow remained whole. She photographed everything, documenting each piece, each marking, each pattern. Her phone's storage filled rapidly. When she documented all 12 containers, she carefully repacked everything, sealing them as best she could. The climb back up seemed longer than before. When she reached the deck, sunlight struck her face with unexpected warmth. She sat there for a moment, breathing hard, her mind racing faster than her pulse. 75 years ago, someone had valued this collection at $85,000. But that was then, before the ship sank, before the collection was lost, before it became a myth. What would it be worth now? To collectors, to museums, to historians. Intact, authenticated, recovered from a ship everyone thought was empty. Sarah pulled out her phone with shaking hands and began to search. Museums, textile experts, auction houses that dealt in historical artifacts. The numbers she found made her dizzy. Individual pieces of imperial Chinese silk sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Complete collections, especially those with documented provenance, reached into the millions. But she needed to be certain. She needed someone who knew what they were looking at. It took 3 days of phone calls and carefully worded emails before Sarah found someone willing to meet her. Dr. Margaret Wu was a textile historian affiliated with a major university, and her response to Sarah's tentative inquiry had been immediate and intrigued. They met at the harbor on a cool morning, the sun just beginning to burn through the fog. Dr. Wu was in her 60s, dressed practically, carrying a leather satchel that looked as old as some of the artifacts she studied. "You said you found historical textiles on a recovered ship." Dr. Wu's voice was measured, professional, but Sarah could hear the excitement underneath. "I think so," Sarah said carefully, "but I'm not an expert. I need someone who knows what they're looking at." They descended into the cargo hold together, Dr. Wu moving with surprising agility. When Sarah opened the first container and lifted out the blue silk with the golden dragons, Dr. Wu went very still. "May I?" she asked softly. Sarah handed it over. Dr. Wu examined it in silence, her fingers gentle, her eyes moving across the fabric with intense focus. She pulled a small magnifying glass from her satchel and studied the stitching, the weaving, the dye. Minutes passed. Then, "Where did you say this came from?" The ship's manifest listed a textile collection from 1948, historical samples being transported to a museum. Dr. Wu carefully set down the fabric and looked at Sarah with an expression that was hard to read. "Do you know what you have here?" Sarah's throat was too tight to speak. She shook her head. "This," Dr. Wu said, gesturing to the containers, "is extraordinary. I'll need to examine everything properly, conduct tests, verify provenance. But if what I'm seeing is authentic, and I believe it is, you've found a collection that was presumed lost decades ago. How much? Sarah managed. Hypothetically, what would something like this be worth? Dr. Wu was quiet for a long moment. Conservatively, if authentication holds and the full collection is intact, you're looking at several $100 million, possibly more. The hold seemed to tilt around Sarah. She sat down hard on the damp floor, her legs unable to hold her. Dr. Wu knelt beside her. Are you all right? Several $100 million, Sarah repeated, the words foreign in her mouth. These are Ming and Qing dynasty pieces, Doctor, Wu said gently. Imperial quality. Many of them appear to be ceremonial fabrics, possibly from the Forbidden City. The cultural and historical value is immense, the market value even more so. Sarah looked at the containers, at the fragments of history they contained, and felt something crack open inside her chest. Not relief. Not yet. Something closer to terror. What do I do? She asked. Dr. Wu smiled. First, we secure everything properly. Then we document. Then we authenticate. Then we figure out what comes next. They worked through the day, carefully transferring the containers to Dr. Wu's climate-controlled van. Sarah signed documents, agreements, letters of intent. Her hand moved across paper after paper, each signature feeling more surreal than the last. As they loaded the final container, Dr. Wu paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why did you buy this ship? Sarah looked up at the silk caravan, at its rusted hull and broken lines. Everyone else had walked away. Everyone else had known better. I don't know, she said honestly. It just felt like something I had to do. Dr. Wu nodded slowly. Sometimes the most important decisions are the ones we can't explain. That night, Sarah sat at her kitchen counter with Emma, the eviction notice still waiting where she'd left it. She hadn't told her daughter anything yet. Couldn't. Not until she knew for certain this wasn't a dream she'd wake from. Mom, Emma asked, are you okay? Sarah looked at her daughter, at this small, brave person who'd watched their life fall apart and never once stopped trying to help carry the pieces. I think, Sarah said carefully, I might have found something important on the ship. Like treasure. The word felt too simple for what lay in those containers. Too clean. Maybe, Sarah said. But we can't tell anyone yet. Not until we're sure. Emma nodded seriously. I can keep secrets. 2 weeks passed in a blur of authentication tests and provenance verification. Dr. Wu called daily with updates. The silk was genuine. The weaving techniques confirmed to be from the correct time periods. The dyes consistent with historical samples. Each container revealed pieces more extraordinary than the last. The auction houses began to call. Discreet inquiries from museums. Collectors who'd somehow learned that something significant had surfaced. Dr. Wu handled them all, protecting Sarah's identity, ensuring nothing went public before they were ready. On the 15th day, Dr. Wu called with the final assessment. Sarah answered on the first ring, her heart already racing before Dr. Wu spoke a word. The authentication is complete, Dr. Wu said, her voice carrying a weight that made Sarah's hands tighten around the phone. I've consulted with 4 other experts, run every test available, and cross-referenced with historical records from 3 different institutions. Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. Sarah, Dr. Wu continued gently, what you found is a collection that was thought to be lost in 1950. The Oriental Textile Preservation Society had been transporting 47 pieces to the Daeyoung Museum in San Francisco. The ship went down in a storm, and the collection was written off as destroyed. Insurance paid out. The matter was closed. But it wasn't destroyed, Sarah whispered. No, it wasn't. The containers you found held up remarkably well. The seals were intact, the desiccant materials inside still functional. Some pieces show minor water damage around the edges, but 90% of the collection is in extraordinary condition. Sarah felt tears building behind her eyes. How much? Dr. Wu took a breath. Sarah could hear papers rustling on the other end. We've had preliminary valuations from Sotheby's, Christie's, and 3 private dealers who specialize in imperial Chinese textiles. The estimates are consistent across the board, with some variation depending on how the collection is sold. Tell me, Sarah said, if sold as a complete collection to a museum or institution, you're looking at a conservative valuation of $450 million. If sold piece by piece at auction, allowing collectors to compete for individual items, the estimates climb significantly higher. The rarest pieces, particularly the imperial ceremonial robes and the palace brocades, could each fetch between 30 and 60 million at auction. Sarah's kitchen tilted. She gripped the counter to steady herself. The total collection value, Dr. Wu said quietly, accounting for all 47 authenticated pieces, their historical significance, their condition, and current market conditions, is estimated at $657 million. $657 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. Sarah tried to picture it and couldn't. It was the kind of money that didn't belong to real people, to single mothers in cheap apartments with eviction notices on the counter. Sarah, are you still there? I'm here, she managed. There's something else you need to know, Dr. Wu said, her tone shifting slightly. The moment we go public with this, your life is going to change dramatically. The media attention will be intense. You'll need legal representation, security, financial advisors. People will come out of everywhere, claiming connections to you, to the ship, to the collection. Some will have legitimate interests, many won't. Sarah thought about the auction yard, about the men who'd laughed, about her landlord, her former employer, her sister who'd stopped returning calls, about everyone who'd watched her struggle and offered nothing but judgment. When do we announce it? She asked. That's up to you. But soon. Word is already starting to leak in collector circles. Better to control the narrative than let it control you. They agreed on a press conference for the following week. Dr. Wu would handle the arrangements, coordinate with the university, prepare the documentation. Sarah's role would be simple. Stand there, tell the truth, and try not to faint. After the call ended, Sarah sat in silence for a long time. Emma was at school. The apartment was empty, except for the sound of traffic outside and the drip of the kitchen faucet that had needed fixing for months. She looked at the eviction notice, at the date circled in red. 11 days left. Her phone rang again, a number she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Miss Chen. A man's voice, professional and careful. This is Robert Hastings, from Hastings and Associates. We're a law firm specializing in maritime salvage and property rights. I've been hearing some interesting rumors about a vessel you recently purchased. Sarah's guard went up immediately. How did you get this number? Public records from the auction. Miss Chen, I'm calling to inform you that there may be some complications regarding your ownership of the cargo found on the Silk Caravan. My firm represents the original insurance company that paid out the claim when the ship sank in 1950. The claim was settled 75 years ago, Sarah said carefully. That's correct. However, the policy included a salvage clause. If any of the insured cargo is recovered, the insurance company retains rights to it. We'll need to review the specifics, but I wanted to give you advance notice that there may be a dispute. Sarah felt cold certainty settle in her stomach. You're saying the collection isn't mine. I'm saying the matter is complicated. Maritime law is complex, particularly when it involves vessels that have been underwater for extended periods. We'd like to discuss this with you before anything goes public. I need to talk to my lawyer, Sarah said, though she didn't have a lawyer and couldn't afford one. Of course. But Miss Chen, a word of advice. Be very careful who you trust right now. There are a lot of people who will want a piece of what you've found. Not all of them will have your best interests at heart. The call ended. Sarah sat there, staring at her phone, feeling the weight of those words settle over her. She called Dr. Wu back immediately. Someone just called. A lawyer representing the original insurance company. He's claiming they have rights to the collection. Dr. Wu was quiet for a moment. I was afraid of that. They'll argue the salvage clause. It's standard in maritime insurance policies. Can they take it? It depends. Maritime law is murky, and the fact that so much time has passed complicates things. You'll need legal representation, someone who specializes in this area. I can recommend someone. But Sarah, I need to be honest with you. This could get expensive and ugly very quickly. I don't have money for lawyers. You will, Doctor, Wu said firmly. The collection is valuable enough that attorneys will take this on contingency. They'll see the potential payout. But you need to move fast and be smart about who you choose. Over the next 3 days, Sarah's phone rang constantly. Lawyers, journalists, people claiming to be distant relatives she'd never heard of. A man who said he'd worked on the salvage crew and deserved a cut. A woman who insisted her grandfather had been the ship's captain and the family was entitled to compensation. Sarah stopped answering calls from numbers she didn't recognize. She changed her voicemail to a generic recording and screened everything through Dr. Wu. At Emma's school, words somehow got out. Parents she'd never spoken to suddenly wanted to chat at pickup. Teachers who'd barely nodded to her before were suddenly concerned about Emma's well-being, offering help Sarah hadn't asked for. Emma came home one day looking confused and uncomfortable. Mom, kids are saying weird things. That we're rich now. That we found a treasure. Is it true? Sarah sat her daughter down at the kitchen table. The same table they'd nearly lost to the pawn shop. It might be true, she said carefully, but nothing's certain yet. And even if it is, we can't tell anyone about it. Not until everything is settled. Okay? Emma nodded, but Sarah could see the questions in her eyes. The hope fighting with learned caution. The weight of keeping secrets that felt too big for a 9-year-old to carry. The press conference was scheduled for Thursday morning at the university. Dr. Wu insisted Sarah meet with a media consultant first, someone who could help her prepare for the questions, the scrutiny, the inevitable skepticism. The consultant was a woman named Jennifer Park, sharp and efficient, who arrived at Sarah's apartment with a garment bag and a no-nonsense attitude. You need to look confident, but not arrogant, Jennifer said, spreading clothing options across Sarah's bed. Humble, but not apologetic. You found something extraordinary through a combination of instinct and luck. That's not something to be ashamed of. They settled on simple black slacks and a blue blouse, professional without being pretentious. Jennifer coached Sarah on how to stand, how to speak, how to deflect questions she wasn't prepared to answer. People are going to want to make this about class, Jennifer said. Poor single mother stumbles into fortune. They'll either paint you as lucky or undeserving. Don't let them control that narrative. You saw value where others didn't. You took a risk when everyone else walked away. That's not luck. That's vision. Sarah wanted to believe that. But, standing in her cramped apartment, looking at clothes that would probably be worth less than a single thread from the silk collection, she felt like a fraud preparing to tell a lie. The night before the press conference, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Emma's soft breathing from the next room. and thought about the men at the auction. The ones who'd laughed, the ones who'd thought she was foolish or desperate or both. She thought about her landlord, who'd served the eviction notice with apologetic efficiency, as if regretting the necessity of throwing a single mother and child onto the street. She thought about her sister, who'd sent that text asking about rent and then gone silent when Sarah couldn't give a satisfactory answer. She thought about her former employer, who'd eliminated her position with rehearsed sympathy and no actual help. All of them would know soon. All of them would see. And Sarah couldn't decide if that thought brought her satisfaction or dread. The university's press room was smaller than Sarah had imagined, but packed with more people than she'd expected. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters filled rows of chairs, their faces ranging from bored to intensely curious. Sarah stood backstage with Dr. Wu, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip them together to keep still. "Remember," Dr. Wu said quietly, "you don't have to justify yourself to anyone. You bought the ship legally. You found the collection legally. Everything after that is between you, your lawyers, and whoever wants to challenge your claim." Sarah nodded, not trusting her voice. A university official signaled them. It was time. Sarah walked onto the stage beside Dr. Wu, her legs somehow carrying her forward, despite feeling disconnected from her body. The lights were brighter than she'd expected. She couldn't see individual faces beyond the first few rows. Dr. Wu approached the microphone first, calm and authoritative. "Thank you all for coming. I'm Dr. Margaret Wu, Professor of Textile History and Asian Studies. I'm here today to discuss an extraordinary discovery made recently in our city's harbor. In January of this year, Miss Sarah Chen purchased a salvaged vessel known as the Silk Caravan at a public auction. During routine inspection of the vessel, Miss Chen discovered sealed containers in the cargo hold. These containers held what we've now authenticated as a complete collection of imperial Chinese textiles, dating from the Ming and Qing dynasties, that was thought to have been lost at sea in 1950. The room erupted with questions. Reporters shouted over each other, hands waving for attention. Dr. Wu raised a hand for quiet. "We'll take questions in a moment. First, I want to provide some context." She clicked a remote, and images appeared on the screen behind her. Photographs of the containers, close-ups of the silk pieces, historical documents from 1948. This collection was being transported to the De Young Museum 75 years ago when the ship encountered a storm and sank. The insurance claim was settled. The collection was presumed destroyed, and the matter was closed. What Miss Chen found represents not just monetary value, but irreplaceable cultural and historical significance. These pieces offer insights into Chinese imperial court life, textile production methods, and artistic traditions that have been lost to time. Dr. Wu paused, letting that sink in. The preliminary valuation of this collection, based on authentication by multiple experts and market analysis from leading auction houses, is $657 million. The room exploded. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Sarah stood there, frozen, as the reality of that number being spoken aloud crashed over her. Dr. Wu gestured for quiet again. "Miss Chen will now answer a few questions." A reporter in the front row stood. "Miss Chen, how does it feel to go from, according to our research, facing eviction to potentially being worth over $500 million?" Sarah stepped to the microphone, her voice coming out steadier than she felt. "Surreal," she said honestly. "I bought the ship because I saw something in it that others didn't. I had no idea what was inside." "Why did you buy it?" another reporter called out. Everyone else walked away. "I don't know," Sarah said. "It just felt like the right thing to do." Do you plan to sell the collection? Sarah hesitated. Dr. Wu had coached her on this. That decision hasn't been made yet. There are legal considerations to address first. Are you aware that the original insurance company is claiming rights to the collection? Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm aware that there may be disputes. My legal team is addressing those claims. Do you have a legal team? I do now. The questions came faster, more aggressive. What would she do with the money? Did she feel she deserved it? What about the original owners of the textiles? What about cultural heritage? Shouldn't the collection go to China? Sarah answered as best she could, following Jennifer's coaching. Stay calm. Stay brief. Don't get defensive. Finally, Dr. Wu stepped in. That's all the time we have. Thank you for your interest. Additional information will be provided through official channels as the authentication and legal process continues. They exited through a side door, Sarah's legs barely holding her upright. In the hallway beyond, Jennifer was waiting with her phone out. It's everywhere already, she said, scrolling through feeds. Every major news outlet, social media, is exploding. You're trending on 3 platforms. Sarah leaned against the wall, suddenly exhausted. What happens now? Now you go home. Lock your doors, and don't talk to anyone unless it's through me or Dr. Wu. The feeding frenzy is just beginning. Jennifer wasn't wrong. By the time Sarah picked up Emma from school, reporters were waiting outside the building. Cameras tracked her as she walked Emma to the car. Questions shouted from every direction. Miss Chen, how does it feel? What will you do with the money? Do you think you deserve this? Sarah kept her head down, her hand tight on Emma's shoulder, guiding her daughter through the chaos. Inside the car, Emma was wide-eyed and pale. Mom, what's happening? I told you, I found something important, Sarah said, pulling out of the parking lot. Now, everyone knows. At the apartment complex, more reporters waited. The landlord stood on his porch, arms crossed, watching with an expression Sarah couldn't read. She hurried Emma inside and locked the door behind them. Her phone was ringing constantly. She turned it off. That night, Sarah and Emma ate dinner in silence, the sound of voices outside never quite fading. Emma picked at her food, her usual appetite gone. Are we really rich now? She asked quietly. Maybe, Sarah said, but maybe not. Some people think the collection belongs to them. We have to wait and see. The kids at school said mean things today, after the news came out. Sarah's heart clenched. What kind of things? That we were showing off. That we think we're better than everyone else now. That we probably stole it. You know that's not true. I know. Emma's voice was small. But they were really mean about it, Mom. Even kids, who used to be my friends. Sarah wanted to rage against the unfairness of it. That her daughter should face this, should carry the weight of other people's envy and resentment. But she just pulled Emma close and held her. It's going to be hard for a while, she said softly. People are going to say things. Some of them mean. But we know the truth. We didn't do anything wrong. The next morning, Sarah woke to pounding on her door. She looked through the peephole and saw a man in an expensive suit, flanked by 2 others. Miss Chen, he called. I'm Marcus Wellington from Wellington Legal. I represent the Hartford Insurance Group. We need to discuss the matter of salvage rights to the silk caravan cargo. Please open the door. Sarah stepped back, her heart racing. She grabbed her phone and called Dr. Wu. They're at my apartment, she said when Dr. Wu answered. The insurance company lawyers. They're demanding I talk to them. Don't open the door, Dr. Wu said immediately. Don't say anything. I'm calling your attorney right now. I don't have an attorney yet. You do. His name is David Chen, no relation. He's one of the best maritime lawyers on the West Coast. He agreed to take your case this morning. I'm patching you through to him now. The call switched. A new voice, male and calm. Miss Chen, David Chen. Don't open that door. Don't speak to them. Give me your address. I'm sending security right now, and I'll be there within the hour. Security. You have $500 million worth of merchandise at stake. You need protection, not just from lawyers, but from anyone who might try to intimidate or coerce you. Trust me. Within 30 minutes, 2 security guards arrived, professional and imposing. They positioned themselves outside Sarah's door, and the lawyers from Hartford Insurance retreated, though not before leaving business cards with pointed messages about cooperation being in everyone's best interest. David Chen arrived an hour later, a trim man in his 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes. He sat at Sarah's kitchen table and spread documents across the surface with practiced efficiency. "Here's the situation," he said. "Hartford Insurance is claiming salvage rights based on the original policy from 1950. They argue that because they paid out the claim, any recovered cargo belongs to them." "Can they do that?" Sarah asked. "Maybe. Maritime law is complicated. But there are several factors in your favor. First, the ship was sold legally at public auction. You are the rightful owner of the vessel and anything found on it. Second, 75 years have passed since the claim was settled. There are statutes of limitation to consider. Third, Hartford accepted the insurance payout and closed the case. They declared the cargo a total loss. It's arguable that they abandoned any future claims at that point. But it's not certain, Sarah said. Nothing in law is certain until a judge rules on it, but I like our chances. More importantly, Hartford knows this is going to be expensive to litigate. They're probably hoping you'll settle for a percentage rather than fight. What do you think I should do? David looked at her directly. Fight. Don't give them a penny you don't have to. This collection is yours. You found it. You preserved it. You had it authenticated. The fact that it was lost at sea decades ago doesn't change your legal ownership of the vessel and its contents. Over the next week, the legal maneuvering intensified. Hartford filed an official claim. David filed a counterclaim. Motions were submitted. Hearings scheduled. The media covered every development, turning Sarah's life into a spectacle she couldn't escape. But something else was happening too. Letters started arriving, not threatening ones from lawyers, but other kinds. A woman in Ohio wrote to say she'd been in Sarah's position once, facing eviction with a child to feed, and the story had given her hope. A teacher in Oregon sent a note saying she'd used Sarah's story in her class to talk about perseverance and vision. A man in Texas, a salvage diver himself, wrote to say he respected her courage in buying the ship when everyone else had laughed. The letters piled up. Dozens, then hundreds. Sarah read them late at night, after Emma was asleep, and felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It wasn't even just about proving the mockers wrong. It was about what it meant to see value where others saw none. To take a chance when caution was the safer choice. To refuse to let other people's laughter define your decisions. 2 weeks after the press conference, Sarah returned to the harbor. She hadn't been back since the day she'd discovered the silk. The silk caravan sat where she'd left it, but now there was a fence around it. Security guards David had insisted on. The ship was evidence now, central to the legal case. She showed her ID to the guards and climbed aboard. The deck creaked under her weight, familiar and strange at once. She made her way to the cargo hold entrance and descended carefully. The hold was empty now. The containers had been moved to a climate-controlled facility at the university, but the space itself remained, dark and musty, smelling of salt and age. Sarah stood there in the dimness, running her hand along the metal walls. $700. That's all she'd paid for this. $700 when she could barely afford it, when everyone told her it was foolish, when the smart thing to do was walk away. She thought about the insurance company demanding their cut, about the people who'd laughed at the auction, about her landlord who'd served the eviction notice without a second thought. She thought about Emma, facing cruelty at school, from kids who didn't understand, who only saw money and assumed the worst. And she thought about the silk pieces themselves, those extraordinary remnants of another time, beautiful things that had survived against impossible odds, waiting in darkness for someone to find them. Sarah climbed back up and stood on the deck, looking out at the harbor. The sun was setting, painting everything in shades of orange and gold. She could hear traffic in the distance, the ordinary sounds of the city carrying on around her. Her phone buzzed. A text from David. Hartford wants to meet. They're ready to discuss settlement terms. Sarah stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, "Tell them, no settlement. We're going to court." Another buzz. "You're sure? This could drag on for months, maybe years." Sarah thought about it. About the stress, the uncertainty, the long legal battle ahead. Then she thought about those men, at the auction, their laughter, their casual dismissal. "I'm sure," she typed. That evening, Sarah made dinner for Emma, like she always did. They ate together at the kitchen table, the eviction notice now buried somewhere beneath legal documents and business cards. They'd found a new apartment, a better one, though they couldn't move until the legal situation was clearer. "Mom," Emma said as they were cleaning up, "why aren't you happy?" Sarah stopped, surprised by the question. "What do you mean?" "We found all that treasure. We're going to be rich, but you don't seem happy about it." Sarah sat down, pulling Emma close. "It's complicated, baby. The money doesn't feel real yet, and there are a lot of people trying to take it away from us. So I can't let myself believe it until I know for sure it's ours." "But you fought for it," Emma said. "You didn't just let them have it. That means it matters to you, right?" "It does matter, but not the way you think. It's not about the money exactly." "Then what's it about?" Sarah thought about how to explain it. "It's about proving that I wasn't wrong, that I saw something everyone else missed, that sometimes the things people laugh at are the things worth fighting for." Emma nodded slowly, processing. "Like how everyone laughed when you bought the ship." "Exactly like that." "Are they still laughing?" Sarah smiled, sad, but genuine. "No, baby, they're not laughing anymore." The court date was set for April, 3 months away. In the meantime, life developed a new, surreal rhythm. Sarah still had part-time work, though she'd hired help now, an assistant to manage the chaos of calls and requests. Emma continued school, though Sarah had to meet with teachers and administrators multiple times to address the bullying situation. The silk collection remained in the university's care, under guard, while experts continued their authentication work. Sotheby's had formally expressed interest in handling the auction, should Sarah choose to sell. The Chinese government had issued a statement requesting the collection be returned to China as cultural heritage. Multiple museums had submitted offers to purchase the collection in full. Everyone wanted a piece of what Sarah had found. Everyone had an opinion on what should be done with it. Through it all, Sarah held firm. The collection was hers. The ship was hers. She'd bought it legally, found it honestly, and preserved it carefully. No one was taking that from her without a fight. One afternoon in March, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. The landlord from her apartment complex, the one who'd served the eviction notice, appeared at her door, looking uncomfortable and slightly embarrassed. "Miss Chen," he said when she answered, "I wanted to apologize for the eviction notice. If I'd known, you'd have done the same thing." Sarah cut him off. "Because you didn't know. And that's the point, isn't it? You judged my situation based on what you could see. You couldn't see what was coming." He nodded, chastened. "I wanted to offer you a better unit. If you're still interested in staying. No deposit, first month free." Sarah smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "We're moving. Thank you anyway." After he left, Sarah felt a strange emptiness. No satisfaction in the apology, no pleasure in his discomfort. Just the weary knowledge that people only respected you when you had something they wanted. The preliminary hearing came in early April. Sarah sat in the courtroom between David and Dr. Wu, listening as lawyers argued arcane points of maritime law. Hartford's attorney was aggressive, confident, citing precedents and statutes. David countered with equal force, questioning the applicability of 75-year-old claims. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair, listened to both sides with an expression that revealed nothing. When the arguments concluded, she announced she would take the matter under advisement and issue a ruling within 30 days. Sarah left the courthouse, feeling drained but strangely calm. Whatever happened would happen. She'd done everything she could. 3 weeks later, the ruling came. Sarah was at home with Emma, helping with homework, when David called. She answered with shaking hands. "We won," he said simply. Sarah couldn't speak. "The judge ruled in our favor on all major points," David continued. "Hartford's claim was denied. The court found that the salvage rights claim was invalid given the time elapsed, the nature of the auction sale, and the fact that Hartford had declared total loss and closed the case decades ago. The collection is legally yours, Sarah. Uncontested." Sarah sat down hard, Emma looking at her with wide, worried eyes. "We won," Sarah whispered. "We won," David confirmed. "Hartford can appeal, but between you and me, they won't. It would cost them more than any potential settlement, and the judge was pretty definitive. It's over, Sarah. You're clear to do whatever you want with the collection." After the call ended, Sarah pulled Emma into her arms and held her daughter tight, feeling tears she'd been holding back for months finally break free. "We won," she told Emma. "The silk is really ours." Emma hugged her back, and for the first time in longer than Sarah could remember, they both cried with something that felt like joy. The news broke within hours. The media descended again, but this time the tone was different. Respectful, celebratory, even. The underdog had won. The single mother who'd taken a chance had been vindicated. Sarah's phone exploded with messages. Congratulations from people she'd never met. Interview requests from every major outlet. Offers from financial advisors, investment firms, wealth management companies. Through it all, Sarah felt strangely distant, as if watching from somewhere outside herself. This was real. This was actually happening. She thought about the auction, about standing in the rain with $700 in her pocket and everyone laughing. She thought about the ship, broken and dismissed, holding secrets no one else had cared to discover. And she thought about what came next, about decisions that would shape not just her life, but Emma's, and possibly the lives of people she'd never meet. The collection was hers, $657 million worth of history and beauty and preserved dreams. But as Sarah sat in her modest apartment, listening to Emma humming in the next room, she realized the real treasure hadn't been the silk at all. It had been learning that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe in your instincts when everyone else calls you a fool. That value isn't always obvious. That the best discoveries come when you're willing to look beyond what others see. The silk would change her life. But the lesson of the silk caravan that had changed who she was. The morning after the court victory, Sarah woke to silence. Not the anxious silence of waiting for bad news, but something deeper. Peace, maybe, or the absence of fear. She lay in bed for a moment, letting the reality settle over her like sunlight through a window. $657 million. The number still felt impossible, too large to fit inside her understanding of the world. But the court documents on her kitchen table were real. The ruling was final. The collection belonged to her, legally and completely. Emma padded into her room, still in pajamas, her hair a mess from sleep. "Mom, is it really over?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "The legal part is. Now comes the hard part." "What's the hard part?" "Deciding what to do with it all." Over the next several days, Sarah's modest apartment became command central for a transformation she could barely comprehend. David Chen coordinated with financial advisors. Dr. Wu fielded calls from museums and collectors. Jennifer Park managed an increasingly aggressive media presence. And Sarah sat in the middle of it all, trying to make decisions that felt too enormous for someone who'd been worrying about grocery money just weeks ago. The first decision was practical. Security, David insisted, and Sarah couldn't argue. Within 48 hours, her apartment had an upgraded alarm system, and a rotating team of professional security guards maintained a discreet but constant presence. Emma found it exciting at first, then unsettling when she realized it meant their lives had fundamentally changed. "Why do we need guards?" she asked one evening. "Because some people do desperate things when there's money involved," Sarah said carefully. "Not because we're in danger, exactly, but because we need to be careful." The second decision was more complex. Where to live. They couldn't stay in the cramped two-bedroom apartment, not with security concerns and media attention. But Sarah resisted the urge to buy something extravagant immediately. David recommended a modest upgrade first, a rental in a secure building where they could breathe and think before making permanent choices. They moved 2 weeks after the court ruling. The new apartment was in a different part of the city, a modern building with a doorman and underground parking. It had 3 bedrooms, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a view of the harbor where the silk caravan still sat, waiting for its final disposition. Emma walked through the empty rooms with wide eyes, her footsteps echoing on hardwood floors. "This is all ours. For now," Sarah said, "until we figure out what we really want." What they really wanted. Sarah turned that phrase over in her mind constantly. What did they want? What should they want? The money had solved their immediate problems. Eviction and hunger, and the crushing weight of poverty were no longer threats. But it had created new questions, harder ones, questions about purpose and responsibility, and what it meant to suddenly have resources beyond imagining. The third decision was the most significant: what to do with the silk collection itself. The options sprawled before her, like a map with too many roads. Sotheby's had formally proposed a landmark auction. They estimated that selling the collection piece by piece would maximize value, potentially exceeding the conservative $657 million valuation. Their presentation was slick and compelling, filled with projections and market analysis. They talked about records being broken, about collectors worldwide competing for pieces, about Sarah's name becoming synonymous with one of the most significant textile discoveries in modern history. Christie's countered with their own proposal, equally ambitious. They suggested a themed exhibition leading up to the auction, building anticipation and scholarly interest. They promised global coverage, documentary filmmakers, books, and articles that would immortalize the discovery. Several museums made offers to purchase the collection outright. The Metropolitan Museum of Art proposed $525 million for the complete collection, keeping it intact as a single exhibit. The De Young Museum in San Francisco, the original intended destination in 1948, offered $490 million and a permanent gallery named in Sarah's honor. The Palace Museum in Beijing submitted a formal request that the collection be repatriated to China, offering $600 million and emphasizing cultural heritage obligations. Each option had merits, each had complications, and Sarah felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her with increasing force. "What do you think I should do?" she asked Dr. Wu one afternoon. They sat in Sarah's new living room, surrounded by proposals and documentation, the harbor visible through the windows. Dr. Wu considered the question carefully. "What do you want to happen to the silk?" "I don't know. I'm not a collector or a historian. I'm just someone who found it by accident." "That's not true," Dr. Wu said gently. "You found it because you saw value where others didn't. That's not accident. That's perception. So I'll ask again, what do you want for these pieces? Not what will make you the most money. What feels right?" Sarah looked out at the harbor, at the dark shape of the ship in the distance. "I want them to be seen," she said slowly. "Not locked away in some private collection, not scattered across the world. I want people to understand what they represent. I want the story to mean something." Dr. Wu nodded. "Then I think you already know what you need to do." The decision crystallized over the following week. Sarah would not sell the collection at auction. She would not scatter it to private buyers. Instead, she would loan the collection to a consortium of museums, creating a traveling exhibition that would visit major cities around the world over a 5-year period. After that, the collection would find a permanent home at a museum to be determined, with Sarah retaining ownership but ensuring public access in perpetuity. The financial arrangements were complex. Museums would pay exhibition fees. A documentary production company offered significant money for exclusive filming rights. Book deals materialized. Corporate sponsors lined up to associate their brands with the project. By the time David finished negotiating, Sarah's net proceeds would be substantial, though not as high as an auction might have generated. "You're leaving money on the table," David told her. "I want to be clear about that. If you sell at auction, you could walk away with close to $700 million after taxes and fees. This arrangement will net you approximately $425 million over 5 years, with additional revenue from licensing and media rights." "That's enough," Sarah said. "More than enough." The announcement was made at a second press conference, this one more carefully orchestrated. Sarah stood at the podium, her hands steady now, her voice clear. "When I bought the silk caravan, I was looking for something I could afford that might be useful," she said. "What I found instead was a piece of history that doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to everyone who values beauty, craftsmanship, and the stories objects can tell about the people who made them." She outlined the exhibition plan, the museums involved, the educational programming that would accompany the collection. She announced the establishment of the Silk Caravan Foundation, which would use a portion of the proceeds to support textile preservation, maritime history research, and educational opportunities for students from low-income backgrounds. "I was a single mother facing eviction when I bought that ship," Sarah continued. "I know what it's like to be dismissed, to be told you don't matter, that your instincts are worthless. This foundation will support people who see value where others don't, who take chances when the safe choice is to walk away, who refuse to let other people's laughter define their choices." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Media coverage was universally positive. Social media exploded with support. Within days, Sarah received thousands of messages from people sharing their own stories of being underestimated, of taking risks that others mocked, of finding value in unexpected places. But not everyone was pleased. Sarah's sister, who hadn't spoken to her in months, called 3 days after the announcement. "I can't believe you're giving it all away," she said without preamble. "Do you know how much money you're losing?" "I'm not giving it away," Sarah replied calmly. "I'm choosing how to use it." "You're being stupid. You could set up your entire family for generations." "I'm setting up Emma for life. The rest is going where it can do the most good." "And what about me? What about Mom? We're family, Sarah. We deserve a share." Sarah felt something cold settle in her chest. "When I was about to be evicted, when I couldn't afford Emma's school supplies, when I was choosing between medicine and food, where were you?" Silence on the other end. "You sent one text asking about rent," Sarah continued. "Then nothing. For months. Now that there's money, suddenly you're family again. Suddenly, I owe you something. That's not fair." "No," Sarah agreed. "It's not, but it's honest." She paused, feeling years of resentment and hurt pushing against her throat. "I'll help Mom if she needs it. But you? You made your choice about what kind of sister you wanted to be. I'm making mine about what kind of sister I'll be in return." She ended the call and sat in silence, shaking slightly. Emma appeared in the doorway, watching with worried eyes. "Was that Aunt Michelle?" "Yeah." "Is she mad?" "She's disappointed. There's a difference." Emma came and sat beside her. "Are you okay?" Sarah pulled her daughter close. "I will be." The confrontations continued. Sarah's former employer reached out, suggesting that, since she'd been employed by them when she purchased the ship, they had a claim to a portion of the proceeds. David shut that down with a single letter citing the timeline and Sarah's independent purchase, but the attempt stung. The landlord who'd served the eviction notice gave an interview to a local news station, claiming he'd always known Sarah was special, that he'd tried to work with her on the rent. Sarah watched the segment with a mixture of disbelief and dark humor. "He's lying," she told Emma. "You know that, right? He never tried to help. He served the eviction notice and didn't look back." "Why is he lying?" "Because now that I'm successful, he wants to be part of the story. He wants people to think he saw something in me. It makes him feel less guilty about what he actually did." But the hardest confrontation came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, Sarah returned to the harbor to check on the ship. She'd been avoiding it, despite owning it, despite everything it represented. The silk Caravan sat in its designated area, still damaged, still listing slightly, but somehow more dignified now that its secrets were known. As she stood on the dock, a man approached. He was in his 60s, weathered and tired-looking, wearing work clothes stained with grease. "You're her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Sarah Chen, if that's what you mean." "I was part of the salvage crew," he said. "We're the ones who pulled that ship up. Spent weeks on it. Dangerous work, back-breaking work. And we got paid day wages while you—" He gestured vaguely, anger and frustration clear in his posture. Sarah felt defensive but forced herself to listen. "I'm sorry it feels unfair." "Feels?" He laughed bitterly. "We were right there. We looked at that hold. We cleared most of it. And we missed what you found. You spent $700 and got rich. We spent weeks and got nothing extra." "What do you want me to say?" Sarah asked quietly. He stared at her for a long moment. "I don't know. That it's not right, maybe. That you got lucky and we didn't. And that's just how the world works." "Would you have bought the ship?" Sarah asked. "At the auction? Would you have spent your own money on it?" He was silent. "Everyone there had the same chance I did," Sarah continued. "The ship was available. Everyone walked away. I didn't. Not because I was smarter or luckier. because I was desperate enough to take a chance that everyone else thought was stupid. And now you're set for life, while I'm still working dock jobs at 63. Sarah took a breath. Come to my office tomorrow. I'm hiring people for the foundation. If you're interested, we can talk about a position, decent salary, benefits, work that matters. Not charity, a job. He looked suspicious. Why would you do that? Because you're right. It's not fair. But I can't change the past. I can only choose what to do now. He studied her face, searching for deception. Finally, he nodded. I'll think about it. He walked away, and Sarah stood alone on the dock, watching the ship bob gently in the water. The silk caravan had given her everything. But it had also revealed something uncomfortable about the world, that fortune could turn on the smallest decisions, that opportunity was often invisible, until someone chose to see it, and that success inevitably meant watching others struggle with your win. That evening, Sarah sat down with Emma to have a conversation she'd been avoiding. We need to talk about school, she said. Emma's expression closed off immediately. I'm fine. You're not fine. I've seen the way you come home. Something's wrong. Emma was quiet for a long time. Then, everyone treats me different now. The kids who were nice before are weird and fake. They want to be my friend because of the money. The kids who ignored me before are mean now. They say I think I'm better than everyone. And the teachers keep asking if I'm okay, like they're waiting for me to fall apart. Sarah felt her heart break a little. What do you want to do? Can I switch schools? If that's what you want, yes. We can afford it now. Private school. Whatever you need. Emma shook her head. I don't want some fancy private school where everyone's rich. I just want a normal school where people don't know about the ship, where I can just be Emma again. They found a new school across the city, a good public school in a different district, where Sarah's story was known, but not the defining fact of every interaction. Emma started the following month, and slowly, carefully, began to rebuild a sense of normalcy. Meanwhile, the Silk Collection's exhibition tour was being planned. The first venue would be the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, a homecoming of sorts since the collection had been bound for the De Young Museum in 1948. The opening was scheduled for September, 6 months away. Dr. Wu led the curatorial efforts, working with textile experts and historians to create an exhibition that would tell not just the story of the silk itself, but the story of its journey, its loss, its survival, and its rediscovery. Sarah was involved in every decision, learning as she went, developing an appreciation for the pieces that went beyond their monetary value. One afternoon, as they reviewed exhibition layouts, Dr. Wu said, "You know, you're developing quite an eye for this. Have you ever thought about studying textile history formally?" Sarah laughed. I barely finished community college before Emma was born. I'm not exactly scholar material. That's not what I asked. I asked if you'd thought about it. The idea planted itself and grew. Sarah began reading everything she could about textile history, about Asian art, about museum curation. She attended lectures at the university, sitting in the back, taking notes like a student half her age. She discovered she loved learning, had always loved it, but had never had the time or resources to pursue it seriously. By summer, Sarah had enrolled in classes. Not full-time, not yet, but enough to begin building toward a degree in art history. Emma teased her about doing homework at the kitchen table alongside her own, but Sarah could see the pride in her daughter's eyes. The dock worker, whose name was Raymond, had accepted the job offer. He now worked as facilities manager for the Silk Caravan Foundation, overseeing the logistics of the traveling exhibition. He was good at it, meticulous and hard-working, and over time, his initial resentment had faded into something like respect. "You didn't have to hire me," he said one day, watching as exhibition crates were being loaded for transport. "Yes, I did," Sarah replied. "Not for you, for me, so I could live with myself." He nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I was wrong. About you, about luck. You saw something the rest of us couldn't. That's not luck, that's vision." As the exhibition opening approached, Sarah found herself thinking more about those early days. The auction, the laughter, the feeling of making the worst decision of her life. She thought about the $700 check, how enormous that amount had seemed when it represented nearly everything she had. One evening, she drove to her old apartment complex. She sat in the parking lot, looking up at the window where she and Emma had lived through those desperate months. The building looked smaller now, shabbier than she remembered. A young woman came out, carrying a laundry basket, looking tired and overwhelmed. Sarah recognized that expression. She'd worn it herself not long ago. On impulse, she got out of the car and approached the woman. "Excuse me, do you live here?" The woman looked wary. "Who's asking?" "My name is Sarah Chen. I used to live in 2B. I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to talk." Recognition flickered across the woman's face. "You're the ship lady, the one who found the treasure." "That's me." They talked for nearly an hour. The woman's name was Angela. She had 2 kids, worked 3 jobs, and was constantly behind on rent. Her story was so similar to Sarah's that it felt like looking into a mirror of the past. Before she left, Sarah handed Angela a business card for the Caravan Foundation. "We're hiring," she said. "We need people who understand what it's like to struggle, who know what it means to see value where others don't. If you're interested, call this number. It's a real job, not charity, but it's a chance." Angela stared at the card, tears building in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone once told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, and they were wrong. I want to help other people make their own mistakes, take their own chances, and see where it leads." The exhibition opening in September was spectacular. Dignitaries, collectors, historians, and regular people crowded the museum to see the silk pieces displayed in climate-controlled cases, lit to showcase every thread, every pattern, every trace of the hands that had created them centuries ago. Sarah stood in the main gallery, watching people move from piece to piece, their faces filled with wonder. Emma beside her, wearing a dress they'd chosen together, looking older than her 10 years. "They're beautiful," Emma whispered. "They are. Do you ever regret it? Not selling everything at auction?" Sarah thought about that, about the extra money she could have made, about the choices she'd given up. "No," she said finally. "This feels right. They're meant to be seen, not hoarded. Their value isn't just in dollars. It's in what they teach us about beauty, craftsmanship, survival." Dr. Wu appeared beside them, elegant in a black dress, her face glowing with satisfaction. "This is extraordinary, Sarah. The turnout exceeds our projections. The media coverage is international. You've created something that will outlast all of us." "We've created it," Sarah corrected. "I just found the silk. You made it matter." The speeches that night were brief and heartfelt. Sarah spoke last, keeping her remarks short. "A year ago, I was facing eviction. I had $723 in my bank account and a daughter who deserved better than I could provide. When I saw that ship at auction, when I raised my hand to bid, people laughed. They thought I was desperate, or foolish, or both. They were right about desperate, but they were wrong about foolish." She paused, looking out at the crowd. Some familiar faces, many strangers, all of them here because of a choice she'd made in the rain. "This exhibition exists because I chose to see value where others saw junk. But that's not special. That's something everyone can do. We're all surrounded by opportunities disguised as problems. Ships that look like scrap. Ideas that sound impossible. Chances that seem too risky. The only difference between me and everyone who walked away from that auction is that I said yes when saying no was safer. She smiled. So I guess what I'm saying is, bid on the stupid ships. Take the ridiculous chances. Trust yourself when everyone else is laughing. You never know what you might find. The applause was sustained and genuine. As Sarah stepped away from the podium, she felt Emma's hand slip into hers, and for the first time since that day at the auction, she felt completely certain she'd made the right choice. 18 months after the court victory, Sarah stood in the Shanghai Museum, watching as workers carefully positioned the final piece of the silk collection in its display case. The golden ceremonial robe caught the light, its dragon embroidery seeming to move in the careful illumination. Around her, museum staff spoke in rapid Mandarin, their voices echoing in the vast exhibition hall. Emma stood beside her, taller now at 11, her Chinese improving rapidly from the tutors Sarah had hired. She listened to the conversations with focused attention, occasionally translating for her mother when something seemed important. They're saying it's the most significant textile exhibition in the museum's history, Emma said quietly, that people have been waiting months for this. Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle over her. The silk caravan collection had traveled to 7 cities so far: San Francisco, New York, London, Paris, Tokyo, Seoul, and now Shanghai. Each stop had broken attendance records. Each had generated scholarly papers, documentaries, and countless articles. The silk had become more than artifacts. They'd become symbols of survival, of beauty preserved against impossible odds. But bringing the collection to China had been different from the beginning, more complicated, more emotional. The Chinese government had maintained its position that the textiles should remain in China as cultural heritage. Negotiations had been delicate, requiring diplomacy that Sarah had never imagined herself capable of. In the end, they'd reached a compromise. The collection would stay in Shanghai for 8 months instead of the planned 3, and after the 5-year world tour concluded, 10 pieces, selected by Chinese scholars, would be donated permanently to Chinese institutions. It's the right thing to do, Sarah had told her advisors when they'd protested the concession. These pieces came from China originally. They should have a chance to come home. Now, watching Chinese visitors begin to file into the exhibition space, their faces filled with wonder and recognition, Sarah knew she'd made the right choice. An elderly woman stopped in front of the first display case, her hand moving to her mouth. Tears slipped down her weathered cheeks as she stared at a piece of imperial silk that might have been created when her own ancestors walked the earth. "Mum," Emma whispered. "Look at her." "I see her." They watched as the woman stood there for long minutes, absorbing not just the beauty of the textile, but the connection to history, to identity, to something larger than individual ownership. When she finally moved on, she paused to bow slightly towards Sarah, a gesture of respect and gratitude that required no translation. That evening, after the official opening ceremony, Sarah sat in her hotel room, overlooking the Bund, the Shanghai skyline glittering like a promise across the river. She was exhausted but satisfied, the kind of deep tiredness that comes from meaningful work rather than empty struggle. Her phone buzzed, a video call from Raymond, back in San Francisco. She answered, and his weathered face filled the screen. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Better than expected. The turnout was incredible, and the Chinese response has been overwhelming. I think we made the right call on the extended exhibition and the donation." Raymond nodded. "Foundation's doing good here too. We just hired another 12 people, All of them folks who were struggling, who needed a chance. That Angela you met, she's running the whole scholarship program now. Says she wants to make sure kids like hers get opportunities she never had. Sarah smiled. That's wonderful. Send her my congratulations. Will do. Oh, and that reporter from the Times called again. Wants to do a follow-up story. 1 year later. Where are they now? That kind of thing. Sarah's smile faded. Tell them I'm not interested. You sure? Could be good publicity for the foundation. I'm sure. The story isn't about me anymore. It's about the work. After the call ended, Sarah stood at the window, watching lights reflect off the water. She thought about publicity, about the way her story had been told and retold, often losing accuracy in favor of drama. The media loved the rags to riches narrative, the fairy tale of the single mother who struck gold. But they rarely mentioned the parts that mattered to Sarah, the years of struggle that had taught her resilience, the mockery that had taught her to trust her own judgment, the failure and fear that had made the success meaningful. Emma emerged from the adjoining room, ready for bed, her hair damp from the shower. Can't sleep? Just thinking. About what? Sarah pulled her daughter close. About how far we've come. About whether I'm doing this right. Doing what right? All of it. The foundation, the exhibition, raising you, making sure the money helps instead of hurts. Emma leaned against her. I think you're doing okay. Just okay? Pretty great, actually. Emma paused. Can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever miss it, before? When it was just us in the small apartment? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering the question seriously. Parts of it, she said finally. I miss how simple decisions were. What to make for dinner was the biggest question of the day. Now every decision feels enormous, like it matters more than it should. But you don't miss being poor. No, Sarah admitted. I don't miss the fear. The constant worry about money, wondering if we'd have enough. That I don't miss at all. I don't either, Emma said quietly. I feel guilty sometimes, though, like we got something we don't deserve. Sarah turned to face her daughter fully. Listen to me. We deserve every bit of this. Not because we're special or better than anyone else, but because I took a chance when everyone said I was stupid. Because I worked to make that chance matter. Because we survived long enough to get lucky. Never feel guilty about that. What about the people who don't get lucky? That's why we have the foundation, Sarah said. To give other people chances. To help them survive until their luck arrives. They stood together at the window, mother and daughter, watching the city pulse with life below them. Sarah thought about all the people in those buildings, each with their own struggles and hopes, their own ships waiting to be discovered or dismissed. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Sarah was reviewing exhibition schedules in the hotel conference room when Dr. Wu appeared with an elderly Chinese man, formally dressed, his posture bearing the weight of years and significance. Sarah, Dr. Wu said, her voice carrying an unusual gravity. This is Professor Lin Weiping. He's the former director of the Palace Museum in Beijing and one of China's foremost experts on imperial textiles. He's asked to speak with you. Professor Lin bowed slightly, and Sarah instinctively returned the gesture. They sat, tea was poured, and for a moment they simply regarded each other across the polished table. Miss Chen, Professor Lin began, his English careful and precise. I have spent my life studying the textiles of the imperial court. I have seen thousands of pieces, authenticated countless collections. But what you have preserved, what you have brought back to the world, is extraordinary beyond measure. Thank you, Sarah said, though I can't take credit for preservation. The ship did that. I just found them. A smile touched his weathered face. "That is why I wanted to meet you. Your humility. In my experience, those who possess great treasures often come to believe they created them. You understand that you are merely a custodian, a link in a long chain of preservation." He reached into his leather portfolio and withdrew a photograph, old and faded. It showed a young man in 1940 seconds, clothing, standing beside wooden crates. "This is my grandfather," Professor Lin said. "In 1948, he worked for the Oriental Textile Preservation Society. He was responsible for packing these very pieces for their journey to America. The last time anyone in my family saw them was the day they were loaded onto the silk caravan." Sarah felt her breath catch. "Your grandfather packed them?" "He did. And when word came that the ship had sunk, he grieved. Not just for the loss of the textiles, but for the failure of his duty to protect them. He carried that grief until he died in 1983. Professor Lin's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "When I heard they had survived, that someone had found them and chosen to share them with the world rather than lock them away, I wept. My grandfather's work was not lost. His care, his precision in the packing, it saved them. And you honored that by bringing them back." Sarah didn't know what to say. The weight of that history, of the human connection across decades, pressed against her chest. "I wanted you to know," Professor Lin continued, "that what you did matters beyond the money, beyond the fame. You returned something precious that we thought was gone forever. On behalf of my family, and on behalf of China, I thank you." He stood and bowed deeply. Sarah rose and bowed in return, feeling tears on her own cheeks now. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the conference room for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the magnitude of what the silk collection truly represented. Not just wealth or beauty, but human effort, human care, human hope preserved across time and tragedy. That afternoon, Sarah made a decision. She called her attorneys and Dr. Wu together. "I want to change the plan for the collection's final home," she said. They exchanged glances. The plan had been set for months. After the world tour, the collection would be housed at the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, with rotating loans to other institutions. "What did you have in mind?" Dr. Wu asked carefully. "I want to split it. Half stays in America, at the Asian Art Museum as planned. The other half goes permanently to China, divided between the Palace Museum and the Shanghai Museum. Not just 10 pieces, half of everything." Her chief attorney, David, leaned forward. "Sarah, that's a significant financial decision. The value of the collection increases when kept together. Splitting it could." "I don't care about maximizing value anymore," Sarah interrupted. "These pieces came from China. They represent Chinese culture, Chinese artistry, Chinese history. They should be in China, where Chinese people can see them, study them, draw inspiration from them." "The Chinese government will be pleased," Dr. Wu said slowly. "But you'll be giving up hundreds of millions in potential future value." "I know," Sarah looked at each of them. "But Professor Lin was right. I'm not the creator. I'm just the custodian. And a good custodian makes sure things end up where they belong." The announcement was made the following week. The response was immediate and profound. The Chinese government issued a formal statement of gratitude. Chinese media praised Sarah's generosity and understanding. Scholars spoke of the donation as a gesture of cultural respect that transcended politics and money. But not everyone was pleased. Sarah's financial advisors were appalled. Several board members of the Silk Caravan Foundation questioned her judgment. And her sister, who Sarah hadn't spoken to in over a year, sent a scathing email accusing her of throwing away the family's legacy. Sarah read the email once, then deleted it without responding. Some people would never understand that wealth meant nothing if it wasn't used with wisdom and purpose. The months that followed brought Sarah back to a question she'd been avoiding: what to do with the silk caravan itself. The ship still sat in the harbor, increasingly deteriorating, a constant reminder of where everything had begun. She'd paid the storage fees without thinking about it, but she couldn't keep putting off the decision forever. She visited the ship on a cool October morning, the first time she'd been back since the exhibition tour had begun. The silk caravan looked worse than she remembered. Rust had spread. The listing had increased. It was dying slowly, returning to the elements that had nearly claimed it decades before. Raymond was waiting for her, having asked to come along. They stood together on the dock, regarding the wounded vessel. "What are you thinking?" Raymond asked. "That I need to let it go," Sarah said. "But I don't know how." "Scrap it?" She shook her head. "That feels wrong. After everything it's been through, everything it protected, it deserves better than being cut apart for metal." "What then?" Sarah thought about it, watching the ship bob gently in the water. "I want to talk to some marine architects, see if there's a way to preserve it. Maybe as a permanent exhibit, telling the story of the silk collection, the container that protected the treasure." Over the next several months, Sarah worked with maritime preservation experts to develop a plan. The ship's structure was too damaged to fully restore, but they could stabilize it, create a protective shell around it, and convert it into a floating museum and education center. It would be expensive, but the Silk Caravan Foundation could afford it. The ship would tell multiple stories: the history of post-war merchant vessels, the silk trade routes, the 1,950 storm that sank it, the salvage operation that recovered it, and Sarah's discovery of the hidden treasure. It would be a testament to survival, to the value of preservation, to the importance of seeing worth where others saw only waste. Construction began in the spring. Sarah visited the site regularly, watching as workers carefully reinforced the hull, built the protective structure, installed the exhibition spaces. Emma often came with her, fascinated by the transformation. "It's like you're saving it," Emma said one afternoon, watching welders work on the hull. "More like giving it a second purpose," Sarah replied. "Ships are meant to carry things, to transport precious cargo. It did that once with silk. Now it'll carry stories." By the time Emma turned 12, the ship museum was nearly complete. Sarah stood on the newly constructed observation deck, looking out over the harbor, and marveled at the transformation. The silk caravan had been reborn, not as it was, but as something new, something meaningful in a different way. The grand opening was planned for the 2-year anniversary of Sarah's purchase. As the date approached, Sarah found herself thinking more and more about that day at the auction, about the rain and the laughter, and the feeling that she was making a terrible mistake. She decided to attend one final meeting before the opening, the auction house, where it had all begun. The manager who'd overseen the sale was still there, older now, grayer. He remembered her immediately. "Miss Chen," he said, standing when she entered his office. "This is unexpected. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to ask you something," Sarah said. "Do you remember the day you sold me the silk caravan?" "I do. We all talked about it after. Wondered what you were thinking, spending money on that wreck. Did anyone regret not bidding, after they found out what was inside?" He was quiet for a moment. A few called back, angry, claiming we should have done more inspection, that we'd undervalued it. But honestly, most of them just felt foolish. They'd walked away from something extraordinary because they couldn't see past the rust and damage. "Do you think they learned anything from it?" The manager smiled sadly. Some people never learn, Miss Chen. They'll walk away from the next opportunity too, because it'll look just as unpromising. The ability to see value where others don't, that's rare. You can't teach it. You either have it or you don't. I don't think that's true, Sarah said. I think it can be learned. But it requires being willing to be wrong, to look foolish, to take risks when everyone's telling you to play it safe. Most people aren't willing to do that. Are you willing to do it again? Sarah considered the question. I don't know. Maybe I got lucky once and shouldn't push it. Or maybe the lesson is that there are ships waiting to be discovered everywhere, if you're brave enough to bid on them. She left the auction house feeling a strange sense of closure. The story that had begun there had come full circle, transformed her life and the lives of countless others. The night before the ship museum's grand opening, Sarah couldn't sleep. She walked through their apartment, a permanent home now, a spacious place with room for Emma to grow, for Sarah to work, for both of them to finally exhale. Emma's room was decorated with photos from their travels, from exhibition openings in cities around the world. Sarah's office was filled with books on art history, her university degree nearly complete. They had become different people, shaped by fortune but not defined by it. Emma was confident in ways Sarah had never been at her age, aware of both her privilege and her responsibility. Sarah herself had discovered capabilities she'd never known she possessed, for leadership, for vision, for making decisions that affected more than just her own survival. But at the core, they were still themselves. Still the woman who'd faced eviction and the girl who'd wrapped herself in a blanket, in a car, with a broken headlight. That foundation remained, keeping them grounded even as their world expanded beyond recognition. The grand opening drew a crowd that exceeded all projections. Thousands of people lined up to tour the Silk Caravan Museum, to walk through the ship that had become legendary, to see the preserved cargo hold where the silk containers had waited in darkness for someone to find them. Sarah stood at the entrance with Emma, greeting visitors, shaking hands, accepting congratulations. Among the crowd, she spotted familiar faces: Dr. Wu, elegant and proud; Raymond, uncomfortable in formal clothes but smiling genuinely; Angela and her children, whom the foundation had helped lift out of poverty; David Chen, her attorney, who'd fought so hard for her rights; and others, less welcome. Her former landlord, trying to blend into the crowd, perhaps hoping to be seen as supportive. A reporter who'd written a particularly cruel piece about her after the initial discovery, now wanting an interview. Her sister, standing at a distance, her expression unreadable. Sarah didn't approach any of them. She didn't need to. This moment wasn't about vindication anymore. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It was about celebration, about honoring what the ship and its cargo had taught her about perseverance and vision, and the courage to see value where others saw only waste. When it was time for speeches, Sarah kept hers brief. She stood on the ship's deck, microphone in hand, looking out at hundreds of faces. 2 years ago, I bought this ship for $700, she began. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, honestly, because part of me thought I was crazy. But I'd learned something important in my years of struggling, that the things worth fighting for often look impossible at the start, that value isn't always obvious, that sometimes you have to trust your instincts even when they lead you somewhere everyone else refuses to go. She paused, looking at the ship beneath her feet. This vessel carried silk worth $657 million, but that's not really what it carried. It carried hope. It carried the work of craftspeople who died centuries ago. It carried the care of people like Professor Lin's grandfather, who packed these pieces so carefully they survived decades underwater. It carried possibility. And now it carries something else. The story of what happens when you refuse to let other people's laughter stop you. When you bid on the thing everyone else walks away from. When you see a future others can't imagine. Sarah looked directly at Emma, standing in the front row. I bought this ship because I was desperate, but I discovered what was inside because I was willing to look. And that's made all the difference. The applause was sustained and genuine. As Sarah stepped down from the podium, she felt Emma's arms wrap around her waist. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Emma whispered. "I'm proud of us," Sarah replied. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to their lives. The ship museum became a landmark, drawing visitors from around the world. The exhibition tour continued, now entering its third year, the silk pieces traveling to museums in Australia, India, and South America. The Silk Caravan Foundation expanded, helping hundreds of people find their footing, supporting students, funding small businesses, giving chances to people who'd been told they didn't matter. And Sarah herself continued to evolve. She completed her undergraduate degree in art history and immediately enrolled in a master's program. She served on museum boards, advised other foundations, and spoke regularly about seeing opportunity where others saw only risk. But she also made sure to maintain balance. She attended every one of Emma's school events. They traveled together, not just for exhibition openings, but for pleasure, for exploration, for the simple joy of experiencing the world. They hiked in national parks, visited small towns, ate at restaurants that would have been impossibly expensive 2 years ago, but now felt like earned luxuries rather than guilty indulgences. One evening, nearly 3 years after the auction, Sarah and Emma returned to the harbor at sunset. They walked along the dock, past the Silk Caravan Museum, which had closed for the day, and stood where Sarah had stood that first night, listening to the hollow sound of her palm against the ship's metal door. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't bought it?" Emma asked. "Sometimes," Sarah admitted. "Someone else would have eventually. Maybe not for a long time, but eventually someone would have discovered the silk. But it wouldn't have been our story. No, it wouldn't. Are you glad it's ours?" Sarah thought about everything that had happened. The fear and uncertainty, the legal battles and media scrutiny, the way their lives had been turned inside out and restructured. The losses too, the relationships that had fractured under the weight of fortune, the simplicity that could never be recovered. "Yes," she said finally, "I'm glad. Not because of the money, exactly, but because it taught me something important, that I was capable of more than I thought, that my instincts were worth trusting, that taking the risk everyone else refuses to take isn't crazy. Sometimes it's the sanest thing you can do." They walked back along the dock as the sun set behind them, painting the harbor in shades of gold and amber. The Silk Caravan sat secure in its protective structure, transformed from wreck to landmark, from forgotten to remembered. Sarah thought about the silk pieces traveling the world, about the foundation helping people find their footing, about the ship museum teaching visitors about courage and vision. She thought about Professor Lin's grandfather, whose careful packing had saved treasures beyond price. She thought about the Oriental Textile Preservation Society, which had trusted those pieces to a voyage that ended in disaster but somehow, impossibly, still succeeded. Most of all, she thought about the moment her hand had gone up at the auction, that instant of decision that changed everything. Not because she was brave or brilliant or special, but because she was desperate enough to take a chance and stubborn enough to see it through. "Mom," Emma said, breaking into her thoughts. "Yeah? If you could go back, knowing everything you know now, would you still buy the ship?" Sarah smiled, in a heartbeat, even knowing how hard it would be, especially knowing how hard it would be, because the hard parts are what made it matter. They reached the car, But Emma paused before getting in. What if there are more ships out there? More things everyone else thinks are worthless? There probably are, Sarah said. The world's full of overlooked things, dismissed ideas, opportunities disguised as problems. Are you going to look for them? Sarah opened the car door, then stopped. She looked back at the harbor, at the ship that had started everything, at the water that had tried to destroy something precious and failed. Maybe, she said, or maybe I'll help other people find their own ships. Sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you discover yourself, but helping others learn to see what everyone else misses. They drove home through streets that had once felt dangerous and uncertain, but now felt simply like streets, neutral and navigable. Sarah thought about the small apartment they'd left behind, about the eviction notice that had seemed like the end of everything, about the $700 that had felt like a fortune when it represented almost everything she had. The money in her accounts now was almost incomprehensible, more than she could spend in several lifetimes, more than most people would ever see. But Sarah had learned something crucial about wealth, that it was only as valuable as what you chose to do with it, that having money didn't make you better than people who didn't. That fortune without purpose was just numbers on a screen. The Silk Caravan Foundation continued to grow. By the end of the third year, it had helped over 3,000 people find employment, funded 200 small businesses, and provided scholarships to 500 students. Those weren't just numbers. They were lives changed, opportunities seized, ships discovered by people who'd learned to see value where others saw only risk. Sarah received letters constantly from people the foundation had helped. Single mothers who'd found stable jobs, entrepreneurs who'd turned dismissed ideas into thriving businesses, students who'd gone to college despite everyone telling them it was impossible. Each letter reinforced what Sarah had learned, that there were overlooked treasures everywhere, waiting for someone brave enough or desperate enough or stubborn enough to claim them. On the 4th anniversary of the auction, Sarah organized an event, not a celebration exactly, but a gathering. She invited everyone who'd been part of the journey, the salvage workers who'd pulled the ship from the water, the museum staff who'd authenticated the silk, the attorneys who'd fought for her rights, the foundation staff who'd turned money into meaningful change. She also invited the people who'd laughed at the auction, not to shame them, but to share the lesson. Several accepted, curious or guilty, or simply interested in the story that had become legendary. They gathered at the ship museum, and Sarah stood before them, without notes or prepared remarks. 4 years ago today, I did something everyone thought was stupid, she began. I spent almost everything I had on a ship that was functionally trash. You laughed. Some of you laughed to my face. Others laughed after I left. And you weren't wrong to laugh. Exactly. From the outside, it looked like a terrible decision. She paused, scanning the faces before her. But here's what I learned. The best decisions often look terrible from the outside. They look risky and foolish and desperate. Because if they looked safe and smart and obvious, everyone would make them. There'd be no opportunity in it. I'm not special. I didn't have some magic vision that let me see what others couldn't. I was just desperate and stubborn enough to take a chance when walking away was safer. And that made all the difference. She gestured to the ship behind her. This vessel taught me that value isn't always visible, that sometimes you have to trust yourself even when everyone else thinks you're wrong, that the things worth finding are often hidden beneath rust and damage and apparent worthlessness. So I'm grateful to everyone who laughed, because you taught me something important, that other people's opinions don't determine your reality, that mockery is just noise, that the only voice that matters when you're making a decision that could change your life is your own. The room was silent. Sarah saw faces that ranged from thoughtful to uncomfortable to openly moved. The man who'd made the doghouse joke at the auction stood with his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The auctioneer, who'd seemed so amused 4 years ago, now looked almost regretful. "I don't tell this story to make anyone feel bad," Sarah continued. "I tell it because I want people to understand that there are ships waiting to be discovered everywhere. Opportunities that look like disasters, ideas that sound impossible, chances that seem too risky, and most people will walk away from them, because walking away is safer, smarter, more reasonable. But some of you won't walk away. Some of you will raise your hand, even when everyone's laughing. And when you do, remember this: the laughter doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're seeing something others can't. Trust that vision. Follow it where it leads. Because that's how extraordinary things happen." As the gathering dispersed, people approached Sarah individually. Some apologized, others expressed admiration. A few admitted they'd gone home from the auction, regretting their caution, wishing they'd taken the chance. The man who'd made the doghouse joke stood waiting until the others had left. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "You don't," Sarah replied. "You reacted honestly to what you saw. I can't fault that." Still, he looked uncomfortable. "I've thought about that day a lot. About how quick I was to dismiss what you saw. I've been missing opportunities my whole life because I'm too scared to look foolish." "It's never too late to change that," Sarah said. He nodded and walked away, and Sarah watched him go, hoping he'd learned the lesson she'd paid $700 to understand. That night, back at home, Sarah sat with Emma at their kitchen table. They'd made hot chocolate, a ritual from the old days that they'd kept, despite everything changing around them. Emma had grown so much in 4 years. She was 14 now, confident and thoughtful, with her mother's instinct for seeing value where others didn't. "What are you going to do next?" Emma asked. "What do you mean?" "With the foundation, with everything. You've accomplished what you set out to do. The exhibition's almost done. The ship's a museum. The foundation's helping thousands of people. What's next?" Sarah hadn't really thought about it. She'd been so focused on executing the plan that she hadn't considered what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Maybe that's okay. Maybe not every chapter needs to be planned." "You could find another ship," Emma suggested with a slight smile. Sarah laughed. "I think one ship is enough for a lifetime." "But you said there are overlooked treasures everywhere." "There are. But maybe my job now isn't to find them. Maybe it's to help other people develop the eyes to see them." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Like teaching people to fish instead of giving them fish." "Exactly like that." They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their hot chocolate. Through the window, Sarah could see the lights of the city, each one representing people with their own struggles and dreams, their own chances to take or walk away from. "Mom," Emma said, "I'm glad you bought the ship." "Me too, baby. Not just because of the money, because of who you became after. You're braver now, stronger. You taught me that it's okay to take risks, to trust yourself, even when other people think you're wrong." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's the real treasure, isn't it? Not the silk or the money, the lesson." "Yeah," Emma agreed. "That's the real treasure." The final exhibition stop came 5 years after the discovery, exactly as planned. The silk collection returned to San Francisco, to the Asian Art Museum, for its permanent installation. Half the pieces would stay there. The other half would travel to China, fulfilling Sarah's promise. The farewell exhibition was bittersweet. Sarah walked through the galleries one last time, seeing the pieces she'd come to know intimately. Each fold of fabric, each thread of embroidery, each color and pattern had become familiar, precious not just for its monetary value, but for what it represented. Dr. Wu stood beside her, in front of the golden ceremonial robe, the piece that had been featured in nearly every article, every documentary, every discussion of the collection. "Are you sad it's ending?" Dr. Wu asked. "A little," Sarah admitted, "but mostly, I'm grateful. 5 years ago, these were hidden in darkness. Now millions of people have seen them, learned from them, been inspired by them. That's better than I could have hoped." "You changed the world, Sarah. In a small way, maybe, but genuinely, that's rare." Sarah shook her head. "The silk changed the world. I just found it." "No," Dr. Wu said firmly. "The silk existed. It was hidden, forgotten, dismissed as destroyed. You're the one who saw value where others saw waste. You're the one who chose to share it rather than hoard it. You're the one who turned a fortune into a force for good. The silk was just silk until you gave it purpose." They stood together in silence, honoring the textiles and the journey they represented. When Sarah returned home that evening, she found Emma waiting with a wrapped package. "What's this?" Sarah asked. "Open it." Inside was a framed photograph. Sarah recognized it immediately. The auction yard, 4 years ago, the silk caravan listing in the background, and Sarah herself visible in the crowd, her hand raised to bid. Someone had captured that moment, that instant of decision, and preserved it. "Where did you get this?" Sarah asked, her voice thick with emotion. "I tracked down the photographer. It took forever, but I wanted you to have it, to remember where it all started." Sarah stared at the image. She looked so different then, thinner, worn down by struggle, but there was something in her posture, in the set of her shoulders, that spoke of determination, of a person who'd decided to trust herself despite everything telling her not to. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. She hung the photograph in her office, where she could see it every day. A reminder not of success, exactly, but of courage, of the moment she'd chosen to see value where everyone else saw worthlessness, of the decision that changed everything. Years passed. The Silk Caravan Museum became a beloved landmark. The foundation continued its work, helping thousands more people find their footing. Emma graduated high school, then college, eventually joining the foundation's board. The silk pieces lived on in their permanent homes, inspiring new generations of visitors. And Sarah, she continued to learn, to grow, to evolve. She completed her master's degree, then a doctorate. She wrote a book about seeing value in overlooked places, about the courage it takes to bid on something everyone else dismisses. She spoke at universities, at conferences, at gatherings of people who needed to hear that their instincts mattered. But she never forgot that day at the auction. The rain, the laughter, the feeling of making a choice that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. That moment lived in her memory, sharp and clear, a touchstone she returned to whenever she needed to remember who she was and what she'd learned. 10 years after buying the Silk Caravan, Sarah returned to the harbor one final time. She stood on the dock, looking at the ship museum, at the vessel that had started everything. It was stable now, preserved, its story told in carefully curated exhibits that welcomed thousands of visitors each year. Emma stood beside her, an adult now, confident and capable, building her own life while honoring the lessons her mother had taught. "Do you ever regret it?" Emma asked. "Any of it?" Sarah thought about the question seriously. She thought about the stress and the legal battles and the way their lives had been transformed. She thought about the relationships that had fractured and the privacy they'd lost. She thought about all the ways things could have gone differently. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret any of it. Not even the hard parts. Especially not the hard parts. Why not? Because the hard parts taught me who I am. They showed me I was capable of more than I thought. They proved that sometimes the scariest decisions are the right ones. That sometimes you have to trust yourself when everyone else thinks you're wrong. She put her arm around her daughter, and they gave us this. Not just the money or the success, but the knowledge that we survived, that we thrived, that we took something broken and made it matter. That's worth every moment of fear, every second of doubt. They stood together as the sun set over the harbor, mother and daughter, witnesses to a transformation that had started with $700 and a desperate choice. The silk caravan bobbed gently in its berth, no longer a wreck but a monument, no longer dismissed but honored. Sarah thought about all the people who'd walked away from the auction that day. She wondered if they ever thought about it, if they ever regretted their caution. She hoped some of them had learned the lesson, had taken their own chances on things that looked worthless, had discovered their own treasures hidden beneath rust and damage. Because that was the real story. Not that she'd gotten lucky, but that she'd been willing to look when others had already decided there was nothing to see. That she'd trusted her instincts when reason said otherwise. That she'd raised her hand when everyone else had lowered theirs. As they walked back to the car, Emma said, "You know what I think about sometimes?" "What?" "All the other ships out there. All the other chances people are walking away from right now because they look too risky or too foolish. All the treasures that won't be found because no one's brave enough to bid." Sarah smiled. "That's why we have the foundation, to help people find the courage to raise their hands." "Do you think it works? Do you think we're actually changing anything?" "Yes," Sarah said with certainty. "Because every person who takes a chance they wouldn't have taken before, every time someone trusts their instincts despite the mockery, every ship that gets discovered instead of dismissed, that's change. It might be small, it might be invisible to everyone except the person it affects, but it's real." They drove through the city as evening settled over everything, turning familiar streets into landscapes of light and shadow. Sarah thought about how far they'd come, how much they'd learned, how completely their lives had been transformed by a single decision made in the rain. The eviction notice was long gone, burned in a moment of cathartic celebration years ago. The cheap apartment was a memory. The fear and desperation and crushing weight of poverty had faded to something Sarah could remember but no longer feel. But the lesson remained, sharp and clear. That value wasn't always obvious. That courage meant trusting yourself when everyone else thought you were wrong. That sometimes the best decisions looked like the worst ones, until time proved otherwise. Sarah had bought a ship for $700. She'd found silk worth $657 million. But what she'd really discovered was something more valuable than either. The knowledge that she could trust her instincts, that her vision mattered, that she was capable of seeing things others missed. That lesson was the real treasure. Everything else was just proof that she'd been right to believe it. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.